Well, good evening. I'd like to call to order this planning meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. Our first order of business is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, and I have nothing under that. The next is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. Declared, then fourth item on the agenda is adoption of minutes, and I've got a motion that's been moved by Councillor Matheson and seconded by Councillor Rich that the Planning Committee minutes dated January the 16th, 2017 are hereby approved as circulated. Any discussions or errors to the minutes? All in favor? Carried. So this evening we have one delegation, and it's Jerry Moss. And Jerry, if you'd like to come to the mic and speak to us. If you've got some new information, we'd like to hear it. If it's stuff we heard at the last meeting, you don't have to go over it, but you're welcome to come up.
To turn on the microphone. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you again and bring a little bit of new information to your decision-making process. I believe you have a copy in your package of a letter dated February 22nd from us. Thank you. So I have 4 items, and I just wanted to briefly go through those. I understand you can all read, so I'm not going to read to you. So the first item regards some question marks that I believe some of the councillors and some of the people in the audience, I think, had around the relative square footage devoted to residential in Mr. Hill's proposal, and that was which is devoted to commercial. Looking at the planning document that's part of your package on page 2, it basically states that there's 3,200 square meters devoted to residential and 3,300 and some square meters for commercial, but then it says including some parking. And that was a bit of a surprise to us. We didn't realize that floor area could include parking. And in fact, looking through the bylaw rather quickly, I haven't seen any other examples where floor area of any development includes also parking area. So we think that that's a little bit unusual. And so we did some calculations for you, and it appears that if you look at pure floor area where people are going to live or work, the ratio is more like 70% residential and 30% commercial floor area. So we just wanted to bring that to your attention, because I think it's important that everybody is on the same page with numbers, and rather than it's important to compare apples to apples. So the second point is a point that maybe you would be better dealt with when you're discussing a bylaw, if you're discussing one, because it seems that there's a bit of a mismatch between the commercial floor area stated on page 12 in your proposed bylaw and the actual commercial floor area that might be on the first floor. So, and maybe it's just a typo, maybe it's a calculation I don't understand, we're not sure about that. So we'll let you think about that one if you get to that point. The third point is, you might recall that Mr. Davidson brought up what he proposed as a comparable development in Southampton, the Highway Commercial 21 Amendment on Albert Street near the Rexall drugstore. And that indeed is, it seems fair that that would be a comparable because it's commercial on the first floor and residential in the upper floors. I think, but it's also important to look at some of the other features of that property and that amendment. One being the fact that there was relief sought for the maximum height from 10 meters in the bylaw to just a little over 12 meters which is 40 feet. This application, Mr. Hill's application, is asking for something significantly taller, asking for 17 meters as compared to 10 in the bylaw. And lastly, about that particular comparable property, it seems like the building fits better on that property in that there was only one setback requirement that was required to be changed, and that was the backyard, relief from the backyard requirement. Whereas Mr. Hill's application is asking for relief from 6 different setbacks. And then lastly, just mentioning, you might recall we handed out a paper copy of a letter, and we mentioned in it some ideas around buffering that would buffer between the residential uses that Mr. Hill is proposing and the highway commercial uses that we are likely to put on our lot or some future owner might. We were frankly dismayed that there were no buffering options offered in the planning report. We thought there might be. We thought we heard some councillors request that there would be some buffering options brought forward. And we're disappointed we didn't see those. I've looked in the bylaw again at site-specific amendments in the bylaw, and many of the site-specific amendments, there are numerous examples where fencing and planting strips are mentioned in the bylaw, and that those provisions were not saved for the site planning process. So we're really of the opinion that we'd hope that some buffering would be considered as council moves forward on this application. And with that, I'll thank you again and take my seat.
Thank you very much. So I guess then the next item on the agenda is the planning report to do with, and I'll read this planning report 184181795 Ontario Limited, care of Andrew Hill for Saugeen Shores Official Plan Amendment number 9-16-46 and zoning bylaw amendment Z-55-16.46, part of Park Lot 18, Plan 111 Godrich Street. And I'll ask Molly, our planner, to present the report.
Thank you, Mayor Smith. The application we have before us is an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment that will facilitate a mixed-use commercial and residential development. The purpose of this meeting is to provide council with a planning recommendation on the application based on a review of land use planning policies, comments we've received from the town, other agencies, and the public, as well as a site inspection of the subject lands. For this application, the planning process requirements were met. We received a complete application in June 2016. We circulated the mandated agencies for review. The public was circulated, all property owners within 400 feet of the subject lands, a minimum of 20 days before the statutory public meeting. A public meeting was held in August in order for the public to review the application, provide comment, and the former Planning Advisory Committee provided comment as well. We received some comments, written and verbally. From that, the applicant went back and revised his application, and we held a second meeting in January in which the public who previously provided written comment or signed the public registry in August had the opportunity to comment on the revised application as well. We took the same process for this evening. Anyone that has previously provided written comment or attended previous meetings and signed the registry were notified of our meeting tonight. Tonight, a recommendation will be made, followed by a decision to council. The official plan application decision will be forwarded on to County Council for final approval, and there will be a decision made on the zoning bylaw amendment. Under the Planning Act, we have a statutory requirement to circulate a notice of decision. Once the notice of decision is circulated, there will be a 20-day appeal period if any appeals were to be received. So to recap where we are so far, the development is a proposal to facilitate mixed-use development of residential and commercial space. There was significant pre-consultation that occurred between town staff and the property owner prior to an application being made. There has also been a significant amount of public consultation and engagement. We are at our third meeting for this application, with the statutory public meeting being held in August of last year. We held a second meeting in January that took a look at the revised application. Again, we had 2 members of the public voice objection to the proposed development, and we received some questions from council for clarification. We provided an information review of policy on the application, and tonight we're here to provide a recommendation. So for clarity and refresher, this is the proposed site plan. Since the January meeting, no changes have been proposed, so it is the same proposal that you saw last month. Here's the proposed east elevation looking at the proposed building from Goderich Street, showing a proposed height of 17 meters, and a proposed south elevation looking at the property from Mary Street. So there are a number of issues and mitigation measures proposed with this application. Some of the issues were surrounding excessive size and massing, which resulted in a revised development proposal with a reduced height, fewer dwelling units, and increased setbacks. The proposed application has been reduced from the initial proposal to be smaller in size and massing. Although the applicant is requesting an increase in height and lot coverage, the proposed development does exceed the overall landscaped open space on site. The revision further resulted in a lower number of apartment dwelling units and increased setbacks to lot lines in both Mary and Goderich Streets from the initial proposal. We received comments regarding balconies on the north side of the building, which are considered to be appropriate design elements and living elements for residents, even if commercial activity restarts on the adjacent vacant lot. Balconies are common, and there has not been discernible increases in complaints where residential uses face other commercial properties in town. We also had comments regarding buffering to adjacent lands, and the developer is interested in constructing a visual barrier in the form of enhanced vegetation or other mechanisms such as a fence. A planting strip will be required, and if lands to the north are developed, a planting strip and buffering would also be required on their lands as well. With regards to questions regarding the amount of square footage dedicated to residential versus commercial, calculations provided by the applicant's architect identified approximately half of the building would be residential. When you take a different approach to it, considering occupancy load, which is defined under the Ontario Building Code, based on floor area, the occupant load for the proposed offices is 175 people, versus a residential occupancy load of 78 people, which represents about 69% of the occupancy load of the building being dedicated to commercial uses. So it is my recommendation that the proposed development represents the efficient use of land and infrastructure. It is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It upholds the objectives of the county and the town official plans and represents good land use planning. As such, I'm recommending that the official plan amendment be adopted and that council forward the signed bylaw to the county for final approval, and that the zoning bylaw amendment be approved and council adopt the draft bylaw. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you, Molly. Then I'll read the recommendation and we'll take questions or comments from the committee. The recommendation is that Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores adopts the draft official plan amendment bylaw attached and forward it to County of Bruce for the final approval, and that Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 55-16.46 in accordance with the draft bylaw attached. Comments, questions? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, thanks, Molly, for the presentation again. And the issue of buffering or a fence on the north side adjacent to the now vacant commercial property, you said that the proponent is willing to or working towards that, yet we heard from the delegation earlier that that wasn't part of the bylaw. How binding is the conditions of putting a buffering zone or a fence along there?
Through you, Mayor Smith, we can add that as a site-specific requirement into the zoning bylaw amendment. The applicant and I did talk about it. Options are a fence between the two properties as well as an enhanced vegetative barrier. There were suggestions around a small landscaped berm with trees on top of it as well, so not to just have a fence, but it is something that we can write directly into the bylaw that would be required and then also required through the site plan control process.
Well, that's good to hear. It seems to me that that condition being part of the bylaw would satisfy at least one of the concerns that we heard earlier tonight. If I mean the density and the setbacks and all the other things being as they are more difficult to change, but that one certainly would go a long way towards. And do we need a motion then to add a component to the bylaw?
I would say yes.
And I would so move that condition of buffer zone, including a hard barrier fence, be included to the bylaw.
Seconded by, okay, just hang on. So, we have another amendment here also, so that we're going to deal with. And I think that kind of deals with it. I have no trouble with this. I think we can do it either ways. We can have this discussion and then expect the bylaw to come back, or we can do it firmly in writing it. As long as staff is clear, I suspect this is probably the better way. But I think, and in fairness, you've moved that. I'll read this amendment and then I'll go to the mover because I think it addresses what your concerns are. You could perhaps withdraw it. I'll read it. It's been moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor Rich that, in addition to the requirements of Section 3.15, a buffer area within the setback between any development on lands zoned H-HC-28 and property to the north shall be provided with trees and hedgerows and other vegetation together with a wooden privacy fence along the property boundary having a minimum height of 2 meters. Such buffer area shall include any required parking area, exclude any required parking area or any other required feature of the development necessary to comply with all other provisions of the zoning bylaw. Such buffer area shall be detailed in any required site plan control agreement. I think that addresses your concern.
Thank you. If that's in place prior to this approval, then that would be certainly.
Yeah, well, this motion will do that for you. If you want to.
Then
my other thing to say about a site plan agreement, I mean, you can include it in the site plan agreement. The site plan agreement is binding and registered on the property also, just in the same way. So, I mean, there's two ways of doing this.
Or both ways of doing it.
Or both ways, yeah, both ways. Planning will find 1, 2, 3, or 4 ways to complicate. Sorry, Molly. To complicate things, but...
having it mentioned specifically in this zoning
fine.
bylaw is not going to any way impede the master zoning
that's fine.
Bylaw, right?
Yeah, and I think I'll let... did you want to speak to this motion, Lou?
I think that obviously I support the motion, and it's a strong idea in this circumstance to have a hard buffer between the two properties when you have when we're introducing residential occupancy next to commercial occupancy, and I think it sounds like the developer is prepared to do it anyway, so I think it's a positive thing to have it in the zoning bylaw.
Any other comments? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions for Molly or Jay. One of them would be the size of the sidewalk. Would that be a standard sidewalk in front of the building, fronting on the highway?
Municipal sidewalk?
Yes.
I have to defer. Well, certainly the major site details have not been negotiated with the developer, but I defer to Andrew to say that particular component of the site plan is more conceptual to demonstrate how it might function on the site. But the municipal sidewalk that's being installed will be 1.5 meter width on the west side of the highway and the north side of Mary Street.
Okay, so one of my concerns is the lack of landscape space fronting on the highway, because one of the sections of the report talks about a requirement that 50% of the landscaped open space is located in the front yard. Our design guidelines also talk about the fact that we want to have green landscape corridors, and if you look at the diagram, it's a very
Yeah, and in this case,
small amount. I understand that overall the landscaping amount exceeds the requirement. Is that right? Yeah. But just in terms of working towards our the vision of our highway corridors, that's a concern for me. I don't know that it's very flexible in this plan. I don't know if there's any room for flexibility there, but that's one of my issues. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is the design of the building, because one of the design guidelines talks about trying to have buildings that reference the waterfront design vision, and I don't see that building pretty institutional to me. I'm sure it might look really different in reality, but it doesn't. When I look at that, I don't see waterfront design, and I don't know if there's any flexibility in that at all, that if that's something that can be worked out in the site plan or not. Those are my comments.
So the comments, or
Yeah,
seeking a comment back? Well,
Yes, please.
I can comment more on the first, not the architectural design. I certainly, if I can comment just generally, that certainly that you're not approving tonight the design of the building. You're approving the building location on the site and general massing requirements as articulated in the zoning bylaw. I'll maybe just leave it at that and maybe defer to Mr. Hill if there's any particular comment back, if the chair is willing. And but on the first component about the lack of landscaping in the front yard, certainly it is a recommendation in the design guidelines, but it's also a recommendation in the guidelines to encourage landmark and key locations in town that can create gateways and create environments that would encourage future development or good design. And part of doing that is making buildings more direct the street, be directed to the street, and creating a more urban environment. And so the trade-off, if you can call it that, between soft landscaping and building design is, I think, appropriate in this case, where we get a high-quality design from an architect with a good designer, and do use landscaping for other features on the site, like buffering, like making amenity space that can be used by the public and by the building tenants. So I'll just leave that comment there.
Vice Deputy Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My opinion hasn't changed since August. I guess I'm the only person at the table who's here tonight who was involved in that meeting. To me, this is not good planning at all. This is an overdevelopment on a very limited site, and certainly doesn't reflect how I have interpreted our official plan and our zoning bylaw over the year. The zoning bylaw is created to provide some predictability and to provide a transparent world to work in. And so to then have an application that calls into question quite a few elements of the zoning on a particular piece of property, calls into question all of the work that we put into developing a zoning bylaw. The official plan takes years to arrive at, and you know, we had a revision, and we'll be up for another revision in about 2018, 2019. And that was not without a great deal of public consultation, and it did set the stage for the supply and the balance of lands within the community for a planning horizon of at least 20 years. Using the example in the comments about the Summerside project and the height there, that's a totally planned development. There was a large space. It was carved up appropriately with roads in different sections for different kinds of activities. It was good planning. It made sense. Looking at what happened across the road from this area and that little sliver of land there across from the Home Hardware, that was a difficult planning decision at the time to have that go over to a residential complex, but it was a great deal of discussion, and eventually the building height didn't overpower the neighborhood, and there's a hedge buffer behind that. And in fact, if you look at that, one of the other concessions that came with that was one access off the highway. I just see this as overdevelopment on a site and just cramming stuff in where it's not necessary. I also went through and looked at this idea of intensification and infilling, and everything that I read in all of our documents suggests that infilling is somehow connected to affordable housing in a lot of ways. And we're not talking about building affordable housing here. These are eventually intended to be condo units. There's no rental sort of situation probably in place there. We're not talking probably about families with school-age children necessarily. And there certainly is no outdoor recreational space near there, which sets up the potential for a better livable experience. It's not the appropriate place in my mind, based on my read of our documents, for high-density development. I think it's, we're not Toronto. The other part of this is, if you look at our zoning and what we set up about the balance and supply of lands in the last official plan process, if you look across the highway in Port Elgin, from the south end to the north end, in the settlement area, you look at what's available for development along the highway for commercial development. There's not very much space there anymore. And here we are we all know we're about to embark upon potentially some growth here. We do not have land zoned for commercial development in abundance here. This is one of the few places where it's zoned for commercial development, and it's abutting commercial development pretty much on both sides. And where are we going to go? If sprawl is happening, are we going south of the 4th? Because when you look between the 6th and the 4th, there's open space there. There's a trailer camp. There's a quarry. There's not land for development necessarily in there. If you go to the north, you go north of Concession 10, you're talking about agricultural land. That's pretty sacred space there between Southampton and Port Elgin still. Where are we going with commercial land? I see this as sprawl upwards, and I just don't think that we need to go there yet. I'm also challenged by the discrepancies with the creative way of presenting the mix of residential and commercial. And I appreciate Molly bringing up occupancy load. I've been sitting at planning or on the planning committee for pretty much consistently since 2004, I think. First time I've ever had an explanation given for how something applies using an occupancy load. I don't think that's defined in our documents, so it's good to hear that. I would appreciate a very descriptive definition being given to us. The application, though, if you really look at it, there's a lot of discrepancy between the numbers in it, and ultimately when you look at the final bylaw, it says all of this and then a minimum of 846 square meters of commercial space. That's not the 1,400 square meters that's described elsewhere. That's not the 3,390 square meters that's mentioned in another place. The application, the bylaw that's there for us to consider, says the whole thing, minimum 846 square meters. I'm kind of challenged by that, and I'm also, just questioning of why there's so many different numbers there associated with the commercial. I'll just end by saying that I just think it's unreasonable in the context of the surrounding neighborhood to cram so much activity into a small space. It doesn't, in my mind, represent infilling at all based on what I've been led to believe from a number of years of sitting here is the purpose of infilling. Our design guidelines and our official plan talks about stuff on the highway being related to commercial activity. It also talks about how design is supposed to relate to the street and be scaled in a way that supports and maintains patterns. And it's in context to the neighborhood. Our design guidelines also very specifically say that larger buildings and buildings with significantly different heights than those around it require larger spacing, not being crammed into a smaller space. So I'm not supportive, and I wasn't supportive back in August, and I realized that this is a continuation of that meeting. That meeting, the end result was a deferral. There was an expectation that it would come back to that committee. That didn't happen, but I just believe that if you really look at what we've done over the last couple of years to set the stage for good planning in this community, this flies into the face of a lot of public consultation and a lot of effort to create an official plan and a zoning bylaw that reflects how we would like to see the growth in this community happen and where we would like to see it happen. And I'm concerned that, this is a commercial lot. Where else do we have commercial space? Where are we going? We're expecting big residential development, you know? Where is the supporting infrastructure for that? It's not in a high-rise condo complex. It's going to be in the appropriate use of commercial land for commercial operations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Minaj.
The Vice Deputy Mayor drives a hard bargain, but she makes some excellent points, and I appreciate that. Back in the day when they designed highway commercial, I guess, buildings like the Queen's Hotel, nicely situated on a corner of Gustavus and Goderich Street, is now functioning with commercial space in the bottom and residential apartment space above. And it was probably that way when it was first designed and built. So I don't think that this is a big leap of faith to think that we could do the same thing here. There are two that have chosen to speak, neighbors, and one of them is a commercial neighbor and one of them is a residential neighbor, and they both made excellent comments about when you get up to a certain height, or when you build your patio designs, which are very nice, and you allow them to sort of zoom down, be able to zoom down, look over the residential, or be close to the highway commercial on the other side, which could very well be another car wash, and the for all we know, and the noise and the fumes, etc. So I wonder, I don't know when and how, maybe it's site plan control, but I would really like to think that we've already addressed the fencing, but I would like to address the other two issues that both of them brought up, and that was where these patio enhancements were located and how they were located on either side of the building. The landscaping in the front, which is, you know, I get it, and I appreciate it, Councillor Grace, but I don't know that anything's going to grow on the highway, that close to the highway, even if we did build a landscaping strip. So I don't know that we need to really concern ourselves with landscaping, and maybe that's a site plan control issue too, that says, you know, planter boxes as opposed to trying to put some shrubs and trees and things that just won't make it there. So this business about the commercial space and the residential space and whether we're including the parking or not, I don't know. I think that there's just not enough information there to make I wanted to support this project, but I feel like we're not getting enough information from that particular piece of the puzzle. Is why are we including that parking space as commercial? To me, it doesn't fit, and it's probably not really appropriate. And lastly, but not least, I guess, is I really like the look of the south elevation, and I wonder why we can't all like the look of the east-facing elevation onto Goderich Street. And I would hope that maybe somebody could take that comment and run with it. Thank you.
Councillor Rich.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I like the way it looks. I think it does fit. We have the major component replacement going on. We have agreements coming into place with Bruce County for economic development. And the idea being that Bruce Power is going to hopefully start to encourage their suppliers to locate in adjacent communities. We need office space. We have a man that is offering to build us office space. I think that's a self-evident kind of thing, that what we need is office space so that people will put their businesses here, so that we have good economic development, and now we have a building that is offering to give us some, and I think we should go forward with that.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I take a bit of an opposite view from the Vice Deputy Mayor. I think that when you look at the work that we did on the official plan and the zoning bylaw in the last number of years, yes, there are a number of things, specific things in those documents which they're seeking relief from in the design of this building, but there was no general intent from the public to preclude this kind of development in this area. There was never an intention to restrict or prevent, I don't think, this kind of development in that area in general. I think this achieves the intent of the public to see commercial development in this area. It isn't all commercial, but I think this is how we're going to see this kind of commercial development happen. I mean, this is how we're going to get it. If you're going to get office residential developed in the community, or if you're going to get office space developed in the community, it's going to come, I think, with a residential component. I think that's just how this is going to play out. And on the question of height, that's also how this is going to have to play out going forward. It isn't economically viable to construct buildings with our height restrictions that are going to make money. You're going to put that elevator in, you're going to have to go over a certain amount of height to make that pay. And I think I've heard it lots from the development community and throughout the community that our height restrictions are preventing this kind of office space from developing, this kind of residential space from developing, and we need this space. And so we have to. This is, I think we need to allow this to proceed, particularly with regard to the height restriction, so that we can send the message that we will be open to some taller buildings in particular areas, and we need to deal more generally with that issue beyond just this particular application, because it's a problem. So I think that this is going to get us. This gets us something we need, as Councillor Rich pointed out. I think it achieves it in a way that makes some sense. It isn't perfect, but none of these things are ever perfect. It has to, it has to be made to fit in certain ways. I've introduced the resolution on the buffering, which I think is important. I hope that we will work our way back to having a vote on that. But I think that was the one area that hung up for me anyway, was a need to achieve some hard buffer there. But if we can do that, then I'm content to let it proceed and hope that it is the beginning of not only more applications that try to achieve this mix, but also maybe some movement from this council to create more opportunities in appropriate areas for this kind of development to take place, because it works for developers, and it will ultimately work for the community, I think. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Luke. One more comment. Go ahead, Councilor Menard.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. It's I guess it's process. It's knowledge about process as well. So I asked a question, and I would like to get the answer for the question, and I'll repeat it for you. And the second thing is, so I made a comment about restructuring the patios and maybe the outdoor space not overlooking the highway commercial, and the patios not overlooking necessarily direct angle overlooking neighboring residential. Is that something that just gets noted and then it's up to the planning authorities or our site plan control and the developer to decide whether they'll like my comment or not? Or do I need to put in some sort of motion to put it in writing?
I think, Jay, you can talk to this again, but I think, Jay, we're talking about the use for the land here. We're not talking about the building. The building will conform and needs to conform. It's a separate process through the Building Code Act.
Okay.
And so we're not really talking about what the buildings, we have the design guidelines that we hope that we can get some, and I think we talked a little bit about that there's been some incorporation or an effort to incorporate those, but we're talking about the land use, not the building.
Okay, thank you. So my question then that I need to have answered is the difference between commercial space and adding parking into the commercial space numbers.
I can answer that generally, and I would say that we can, for a moment, bear with me, we would imagine that there are no numbers. So we're not going to pretend that occupancy load or that the parking space forms part of the commercial space, and I'd rather just focus on, let's compare this amount of commercial space with other commercial spaces in town as a sort of a geometric shape. There's about 15 to 18,000 square feet that's proposed, which is very similar to what we've already approved at the south end, south of Canadian Tire, the exact same amount of, or not, very close to the same amount of commercial space, which we felt was an appropriate amount of commercial space for that property, and we approved a site plan. Here, we're going beyond that. I would argue that it's even that we get the same amount of commercial space and we more efficiently use the property for other uses like residential units. Of course, I recognize that the Vice Deputy Mayor feels that it's maybe too much, and you can determine that tonight, but I would say that we're having the same amount of commercial space that we felt was appropriate in another highway commercial area of town, and we're putting that same amount at this location, regardless of whether you include parking or not. Just looking at the building space then, that's what I'm intending. However much parking is provided is irrelevant for my argumentation. I'm just looking at the amount of building that's dedicated to commercial activity, at least according to the proposal.
Okay. One more comment. Go ahead.
Can somebody, perhaps Molly, perhaps Jay, explain to me why the bylaw is very specific, and I'm just trying to get the reference, in saying that blah, blah, blah. Very specific in saying about a maximum of 24 residential dwelling units shall be permitted, providing that the building contains a minimum of 846 square meters of commercial floor area on the ground level. Why is the wording that way? Because that sets up the potential for a very small commercial area and still the 24 units. It's not setting up that this massive commercial development is about to happen. So why has the language been included that way?
Through you, Mayor Smith. The highway commercial policies in the zoning bylaw, as of right, are written in a similar way that requires that certain units have a minimum square footage. So we've incorporated that into the draft bylaw so that it's consistent with the way that the current bylaw is written. So that's why we've indicated a minimum on the ground floor, as opposed to saying a total area divided by 2 different floors or 3 different floors. There has been an indication made by the developer that if there was a significant desire for more commercial space, that's not something that he's opposed to. So that's why you put minimums in as opposed to maximums in case they can't be achieved. So from his perspective, for example, if there was a desire for increased office space, it might be something that he can accommodate in this building. It has been something that has been identified through our economic development initiatives with Bruce Power and bringing vendors here through the major component replacement project, that they're typically looking for 5,000 to 8,000 square feet of office space. So perhaps if someone approached him and wanted an increased amount, we've put a maximum number of dwelling units, but he can go below that, and we've put a minimum number of commercial square feet so that it can go up as well. So it does provide some flexibility, but does not reduce the amount of commercial area or increase the number of residential units. So it's giving a little bit of a range for some flexibility.
Okay. Just a few comments. I agree with what Councillor Rich raised and the Deputy Mayor. I think I can just say we just attended a Canadian Nuclear Conference, and that was the theme that our people are looking to come to our community, and these are the types of space that they are very interested in, both residential and commercial. And not to say that is one of the things that we see in our community, one of the needs that we see going forward. Whether it's good planning or not, I think it is good planning. I think, like you, Luke, I think, we talk about where is commercial going to go? Well, here is commercial going to go. And we don't go out and pre-zone a whole wide areas of the community, hoping we think we know it's going to be right. We wait for developers like Mr. Hale to come along and give us an idea, and then we pick what's right, because you simply... We are not very good at picking winners and losers and those types of things, saying where this commercial should go here, industrial should go here, and invariably you end up with coming back through this process, changing it because you weren't right in the first place. I think where you see this densities like this, it helps us from that sprawl, going out into those areas beyond the urban envelopes that eventually we'll see or won't see. So I think it's like, and I say this often, but planning is not an exact science, and it is often compromises that we all get to what we kind of really want. We never get all we want, but we hope we get something that is eventually good for the community, something the community will support. So, I guess procedurally, I have the original recommendation, and I'll read it one more time. That's the short one. The recommendation is that the council of the town of Saugeen Shores adopts the draft official plan amendment bylaw attached and forwarded to the county of Bruce for final approval, and that council of the town of Saugeen Shores approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 55-16.46 in accordance with the draft bylaw attached. Call the question already. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, so now we'll deal with this one. The next motion was the one that Deputy Mayor Charbonneau and Councillor Rich, and I'll read it again. It is, in addition to the requirements of Section 3.15, a buffer area within the setback between any development on land zone HC 28 and property to the north shall be provided with trees, hedge groves, or other vegetation, together with a wooden privacy fence along the property boundary, having a minimum height of 2 meters. Such buffer area shall exclude any required parking or any other required feature for the development necessary to comply with all provisions of the zoning bylaw. Such buffer area shall be detailed in any required site plan control agreement. I think we've had lots of discussion on that. I'm ready for the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So, so the next item then is adjournment. Got this? Yep. It's been moved by Councillor Minaj, seconded by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, that this Planning Committee of February 27, 2017 hereby adjourns at 6:46 p.m. All in favor? That's carried.